I've got another big Palantir stock update to share. Today it's an investor's edition. We'll talk about confirmation of George Soros selling his stake last quarter, Stanley Druckenmiller opening a 9-figure PLTR position, among other investor activity. I'll share a couple clips describing the relationship between Celularity and Palantir, and more, including information about Palantir's use in the Space Force. Let's go. So I'll get the selling out of the way first. Who has closed their positions recently? We have Soros selling. George Soros' investment firm sold off a nearly 18.5 million share stake in the company as the billionaire investor opposes its business practices. I talked about this when he originally announced that he would be dumping the stock. It turns out many people don't care for him and actually find his selling bullish. So that could have been a reason for some of the extreme downward pressure over the last couple months, and maybe that pressure begins to subside. But we also had Loeb selling. Billionaire investor Dan Loeb also exited his Palantir trade in the first quarter of 2021. Third Point security filings for the period show that Loeb exited his Palantir position, selling over 2 million shares of the big data company. Again, we're starting to see how the stock has been hammered this year. Some firms selling in addition to insider selling, but that's in the rear view mirror behind us. They don't want to be along for the Palantir ride. So now let's have a look at who's buying and wants exposure to this stock. Druckenmiller is buying. Cathie Wood isn't the only fund manager that has been linked to Palantir lately. After I just said George Soros officially closed out his position in Palantir last week, and Third Point's billionaire manager Daniel Loeb also exited his position. While these may seem like bearish signs for how institutional investors view Palantir, hedge fund legend Stanley Druckenmiller initiated a position of 6 million shares, or nearly $140 million. And I found a clip of him speaking about the market conditions back in September of 2020 before the pullback, considering how Palantir surged to an incredible valuation earlier this year and has now crashed back to a reality around $20 per share. The stock is still a battleground one between bulls and bears. But have a listen to this, because Druckenmiller would not be going against his own advice and would not be buying PLTR if it aligned with his thoughts of this market still being a raging mania.
But inevitably after a big party, there's a hangover. And right now we're in an absolute raging mania. We've got commentators on your network encouraging companies to do stock splits. Companies then go up 50%, 30, 40%, big market cap companies on stock splits. Look, Joe, I have no clue where the market's going to go in the near term. I don't know whether it's going to go up 10%. I don't know whether it's going to go down 10%. But I just want to remind people there is no valuation support because we dropped 10%. That hasn't mattered because we're so far outside of the valuation realm with the Fed doing what they're doing.
Ark Invest Buying. Ark Invest's Palantir buying is ever increasing. It's well beyond the point to which I would call it just establishing a position. They're going for outsized PLTR ownership. Let's have a look at the updated figures. Ever since they bought back in October, they've been adding gradually in the first few months and then very substantially when the stock began to fall, and most recently in May, we've seen their position size increase from under 20 million shares to over 27 million shares. If we look at the actual activity, this month alone, we've seen buying of millions of shares. May 4th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 14th, and 17th. Ark Invest has been buying heavy, especially in Ark K and a little bit in Ark W. Most recently, May 17th, Ark Invest adding 737,000 shares to Ark K. So if we have a look at weight in portfolio, Palantir has now increased from earlier in the month under 1% to now a weighting of 1.42% overall, which doesn't seem like much, but Ark Invest is managing billions of dollars, and 1%, starting all the way from 0% and 0.1% earlier on in November, is a substantial increase and shows a very high level of conviction. But what else would you expect from Ark Invest? And now for a different kind of investment. Let's focus in on Palantir and Celularity. We heard from Palantir management on the Q1 call that they are making SPAC investments when they see fit, given what they believe to be unique opportunities to connect on a deeper level with businesses that already use Foundry. So what I'm about to show you is a rare interview with the CEO of Celularity, and he shares comments about working with and obtaining investments from Palantir.
Join forces with Palantir, introducing artificial intelligence into its pursuit of cancer treatments with patented cellular medicine. The company is also going through a de-SPACing process, which is really just the next step in merging with a SPAC. Joining us now is Dr. Robert Hariri. Dr. Hariri, good to have you here on the show. Let's start with this partnership with Palantir. What will you be able to do now that you've partnered with this company? And I'm also curious if they've taken an equity stake in Celularity.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. As you know, Palantir is an absolute world leader in the creation of software systems that compile data, decisions, operational information, and help companies create efficiencies that heretofore didn't exist. So in our industry, cellular medicine is still, to be quite candid, in its infancy. There's a tremendous amount to be learned by interrogating the biology of the source material that comprises the cellular medicines, and also understanding the biological activity, the performance in manufacturing, the performance clinically, and then using that data to make decisions about selecting products for different diseases, how to administer them, and ultimately how to present them to the regulatory community for things like registrations.
Dr. Angela here. So let's talk about that, because obviously the idea of AI in healthcare is really growing, and different companies have tried different ways. We know that IBM Watson Health, for example, was struggled in some way. So what makes this different, and what specifically are you hoping to get out of it that can actually help the end consumer?
Certainly, and I want to also mention that we're very fortunate that Palantir not only decided to work with us as a company in cellular medicine, but they also, in fact, have an interest in participating as an equity owner of the company, which, as you know, is quite valuable to us. So first and foremost, the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning has first been deployed in the genomic sphere, where it's been used to help interrogate these enormous data sets that come with every cellular medicine. The genomics tools that are available today to understand what genes are responsible for what diseases and so on and so forth is extremely helpful information to a company like ours that is developing immunotherapy products to treat different cancers, as well as products to treat degenerative diseases, infectious diseases, and so on. What Palantir brings to this relationship is the ability to work with enormous data sets and help us begin to decipher what's important, what's meaningful for us as we determine which product to take into which disease, and what's potentially predictive of the activity, the biological activity in patients. So, as you know, we're very focused on accelerating the time to develop products that can be registered by the FDA. We're also looking at using tools like real-world data to help create efficiencies around developing those products. And we also need to build a large and capable data system which can accommodate enormous numbers of, for example, donor cell lines. Every donor comprises a unique genome, and the ability to manage that enormous data set is something that our industry can dramatically benefit from. As you know, we chose a pathway to become a public company by merging with a special purpose acquisition corporation that had very, very similar philosophies to ours as how to build a world leader in cellular medicine. The process of de-SPACing involves that special purpose acquisition corporation achieving their shareholder agreement and vote to consummate the merger, and then to transition our equity owners into equity owners in the new corporation. We anticipate that this process will take the next several weeks, and we hope to have completed and closed the transaction sometime in June. COVID-19 might, in fact, be a dress rehearsal for the next pandemic. And that next pandemic may be with a virus or other infectious agent that we don't identify. So if you have a generic active immunotherapeutic that helps protect the patient from a viral illness, that might be applicable across the range of known and unknown viral pathogens. And I think that that's a very meaningful place for immunotherapy to move in the future.
And finally, last thing for today, we're sticking with the theme of investments. The Space Force is going to increase spending on technologies to turn data into knowledge. I've got a great article here that I've annotated and I'm about to run through. Shout out to Brian Griffo on Twitter for the link. The US Space Force plans to spend billions of dollars over the next decade to convert huge amounts of data that resides in separate systems into a digital enterprise architecture. So everything coming up in green here are specific phrases or words that if you've been following Palantir, you should recognize as really just Palantir buzzwords that should draw you in and say they are specifically talking about Palantir here. So they say how data is now stored in disconnected silos and it's difficult to analyze it and make sense of it. And senior material leader for Space Command and Control at the Space and Missiles Systems Center says we need to do a lot of data-driven decision making. The Space Force will pursue a data management strategy known as data as a service, consolidate information into cloud platforms so it can be analyzed with artificial intelligence tools and delivered to users much faster. And data as a service automates the entire process. Okay, so there's a little background about what they're looking for. Now on to the information proper. Space and Missile Systems Center last month awarded Palantir a $32.5 million contract for data as a service. The company will merge data used by the Space Force, the Air Force, and the North American Aerospace Defense Command. So here we are, this is Palantir's direct involvement. Palantir in April 2020 won a $10 million contract from SMC's Space Enterprise Consortium to develop data as a service tools. Palantir uses artificial intelligence to organize files, spreadsheets, emails, documents, images, videos, and other data that is typically in disconnected stovepipes. And the article says here how Palantir's successful prototype led to the recent $32.5 million contract. So as we know, Palantir prototypes and does pilot programs before going on to sign any contracts. And now we have confirmation that that actually did work here in this specific instance. So now SMC wants to start a larger effort with multiple providers that would compete for task orders, a contracting approach known as indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, or IDIQ. She noted that 16 companies competed for the consortium's prototype contract a year ago. We imagine it could be well over $1 billion for the IDIQ, and we're really excited to be able to do that within the next year. It will likely be over 10 years long, and it could be in the single-digit billions, or even as large as $10 billion. The initial data as a service projects led by SMC have sparked interest, and the demand is likely to grow. Many organizations across the Air Force and Space Force want to be able to come into our tech stack, or come into the visualizations that we create, and so we're working to build this IDIQ to help expand and scale. Some key problems the Space Force has to solve, such as ensuring spaceflight safety and protecting satellites from threats in orbit, require analyzing colossal amounts of data from many sources. Under Palantir's contract for data as a service, for example, Space Force officials will be able to access a dashboard showing the location of satellites and other objects in orbit, as well as information on the status of the satellite, who launched it, who controls it, and whether it is maneuvering. Now that I can bring in all of those things together and create a dashboard so that operators or my leadership can look at it, they can click on that object and they can find out all of this information, all consolidated into one place. This system is pretty real time because it's constantly pulling from the data feeds that it fuses together. And finally, the last snippet here, protecting space assets from threats, the document says, requires a sophisticated, data-infused, user-defined operational picture that is capable of fusing and presenting multi-source intelligence. So I hope reading through specific parts of that article was good context for Palantir's involvement in the Space Force and how, in my opinion, they are likely to directly benefit from even more spending in the future, because I think they offer just what the Space Force is looking for. And of course, they already offer their software and have been working with the Space Force already. So I expect that to increase in the future. So that'll do it for this Palantir stock update. Some selling from firms, but also buying from fund managers. I think we're really starting to see a turning point in Palantir stock. The stock over $21 today as I record this, getting a little bit of a rally going in the morning here. I think whatever we had there at the bottom around $16.40 or so cents was a turning point for the stock. Whether or not the stock actually goes much higher in the next few months is not something I am able to say definitively, but I think we had some investors cycle out and more are cycling in, so I expect Palantir stock to establish itself a good range over the next coming weeks until we have another catalyst to look for. So hit like if all of this information was helpful to you, and I'll catch you in the next video. Until next time.